Hey everybody, this is Jason again here at the Children's Museum of Houston. We're going to continue our talk on physics today, and we're going to talk about something that's really kind of cool, which is a parachute. So your kids, this time are going to get to make a parachute. Now, making a parachute's a lot of fun, especially with what we give you. We give you all kinds of materials for each kid to choose from. We give them some Mylar, we give them some like clear plastic sheets, and we give them almost like garbage black sheets, garbage can like black sheets that they can use for the body of their parachute. Then we give them all kinds of stuff to make the parachute with. Most importantly, we give them these sort of cutouts right here, triangle shapes, oval shapes, octagon shapes, rectangle shapes, that they can use as a template to cut out their parachute. As you can see, the parachute I made, it has the octagon shape. But they're not limited to using those shapes. You know, kids' imagination, if they feel confident in their cutting skills, they can cut anything they want out of this, as long as it's a parachute that works. And that's where it becomes difficult, is making a parachute work. There's other things they're going to be able to use. They're going to have some string that they can use, as you can see, like the ties. They can also use yarn. These little stickers can help tie down the ties. And then to give the parachute some weight, we have these washers here. We also have cups that they can fill with beans. And with the beans in the cups, you can do this fun thing. You can see how many beans they can hold in the cup before the parachute has too much weight and ceases to work. Now, the interesting thing about a parachute is there's a bit of a sort of counterproductive thing going on with a parachute in a way. It's doing exactly what it needs to do, but your mind makes it think it shouldn't do what it needs to do. And that's because parachutes fall into the physics of aerodynamics. And when we talk about aerodynamics, a lot of times what we talk about is the ability for things to fly. So how does an airplane fly? How does a jet plane fly? How does a rocket in space fly? How does a glider fly? How does a helicopter fly? How do all these things get up off the air is what we're really looking at to do. But in the case of a parachute, you're actually trying to get something gently to the ground, but yet it still uses the aerodynamic forces. It's just using them in an opposite way. When you think about aerodynamics, you think about really four forces, not including the whole ideas of the laws of motion, the laws of gravity, all that kind of stuff. We're really just talking about these four different forces. And what we're talking about is lift, we're talking about drag, we're talking about thrust, and we're talking about weight, which has to do with gravity. So lift, drag, thrust, and weight. Now, thinking about it in terms of keeping something up in the air, lift is actually what keeps something up in the air, and drag is something that's trying to drag it back down, basically by slowing it down. Thrust is something that humans have been able to figure out to keep something in the air with internal combustion engines or propellers or things like that. And our old friend gravity, well, everything goes to the center of the biggest object being the Earth's center in this case. So if something's up in the air and it loses thrust and it starts to lose lift and the drag starts to slow it down and bring it towards the ground, well, eventually gravity's going to take over and it's going to hit to the ground. Okay? Now, what a parachute's trying to do is it's trying to get to the ground, but get to the ground as gently as possible. So the most important thing you have to do with the parachute is you have to balance the weight. The weight has to be correct. Now, when a human being takes a parachute, jumps out of a plane, and soars down to the ground or gently floats to the ground, they actually ask questions like, hey, how much do you weigh? Because they want to make sure they give you a proper parachute. If you have an improper parachute that can't sustain your weight, you're going to go crashing to the ground. So you've got to strike a balance between gently falling to the ground and crashing to the ground. You don't want to crash to the ground. One thing that you're going to have to sort of be aware of is your space. Like right now, if I were to throw my parachute up into the air, there's not really a lot of room for it to open up and come to the ground. So it's going to look like it's a complete failure because it's going to crash to the ground really quickly. What you want to do is you want to have space. So you want to either do this outside. If you have a really big sort of auditorium space, that's great because you usually have high ceilings. If you have a place where you can go on a second floor, best thing, you can drop them on the second floor. If you have a place that you can go on the third floor, which some schools have, go all the way to the top. The higher you get, the better you will see how these are demonstrated. So that's what you want to make sure of, that you're giving the kids a chance to demonstrate it correctly, but also use your space. So if you don't have a space where you can go to second and third floor, if you only have a small sort of auditorium space or gym space, you just want to make sure that they feel good about what they're doing by balancing the weight correctly. So when they throw it up, it opens up and comes to the ground. Let's talk about those forces just a little bit. Like I said, drag. Drag is slowing you down. So the opposite of drag is actually thrust. Thrust is going to speed you up and keep you into the air. Birds use thrust. It doesn't seem like they do. It seems like they're gliding a lot, but their thrust is flapping their wings, okay? We use thrust opposite ways. We use engines, like I said, or propellers. So drag and thrust are acting against each other. Then you have lift and gravity acting against each other because it makes sense. Lift is something that keeps you up in the air, either through airfoils or wind or whatever, and gravity is trying to pull you back down. So you're trying to strike a balance between all that. Now, in the case of the parachute, what you're really doing is you're giving it a little bit of lift, not much, because kids can't really throw it that far in the air, or you're not going to be that high up into the air. You're going to be maybe 30, 40 feet if you have a second, third floor, which is still great because it'll open up and fall gently down to the ground. So what you're really kind of trying to balance is your drag and your gravity, because gravity is a constant rate. It's going to pull anything down at the same speed in perfect conditions. Obviously, we have things that cause that gravitational pull to be acted upon as well. You know, you put a feather into the air, wind's going to carry it off. You drop a hammer in the air from 20 feet, it's just going to fall straight to the ground. But in perfect conditions, like if you were on the moon, where it's kind of a vacuum, you know, no atmosphere, nothing really acting upon it, you drop a feather and a hammer at the same time, they're going to fall to the ground at the exact same time. Gravity has a constant rate. So the gravitational rate's constant. It's the drag that you can sort of mess around with. Now, the way I made my parachute was pretty simple. I cut out the octagon shape. I stickered on the ends of the strings here, and I tied them to this. It looks kind of like a weird sort of shape right now, but it's actually 4 of these washers with tape wrapped around them. The reason I wrapped tape around them is because I tied knots from the strings to hold it in. So this is a perfect example where kids can use their skill of iteration, doing something a little bit different each time to improve upon their making. So they can start with 1 washer. They can then go into 2 washers. They can then go into 3 washers, 4 washers, 5, 6, 7, 8 washers, whatever they want. They can start with an octagon shape. They can then say, oh, maybe the circle shape works better. Maybe the triangle shape works better. Maybe the rectangle shape works better. They can try different material. Oh, I got some Mylar. Well, let me see if the plastic works better. Maybe black plastic works better. Maybe white plastic works better. You know, they can try different yarn. Like the yarn and string have different weights, different masses. They can use paper clips. They can do all kinds of things. They can cut slits into the parachute to see if that does something, like an airfoil kind of thing. But what you really want to understand about a parachute is you don't want to crash to the ground quickly. Even if it opens up beautifully, you want it to sort of gently glide to the ground, fall to the ground, so that the person, if it was a person, doesn't get harmed when they land. So that's why you want to keep those physics in mind, especially the idea of the drag and the gravity, so the kids understand, oh, gravity is constant, it's going to pull it to the ground at a constant rate, okay, 9.8 meters per second, and drag is what's going to cause it to gently glide down, so it's okay to add weight. The first thing kids are going to want to do is not add weight to it. They're going to be like, oh, if I put too much weight, it's going to crash to the ground too quickly. It's not adding too much weight, it's adding the right amount of weight. It also has a lot to do with the string length and how you put everything together. So really, this could last a couple of days even, because they can continue making more and more and more parachutes. And that's what we want them to do. We want them to be able to take their existing parachute, explore with it, and make one that works better for them. All right, so that's parachutes. You guys are going to have a great time doing this. This is great physics we're talking about, and we hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. This is Jason, signing off.